We're back. This is video 2 of the Apex Engineered Z31 subframe install. We are on to the disassembly of the front subframe. We have it right here. It is already taken out. I figured it'd be easy to show it out and have easy access to point to very specific stuff, as I did with the rear subframe. Disclaimer for the disassembly videos, this is completely informational. You're gonna wanna follow along very slowly, pause it at points so you can understand what's going on. This is not really entertainment. This is if you wanna do the job. You're not here to do the disassembly.
You might not enjoy the video.
Yeah, you might not enjoy the video. It's not for everybody. That being said, let's get right to it. Step 1 of removing your front subframe is, you'll start by removing your front calipers. Very simple. I have mine removed already on each side, hung up on a terrible spot, but it worked, zip tied. There'll be 2 bolts on the rear of the caliper bracket. Take those off and pry your caliper off, then zip tie it up wherever you see best fit. If you wanna remove the shock, do not zip tie up the caliper to the shock, obviously. If you're taking the shocks out like I did, zip tie it to an appropriate spot. I did it on, there was a little bar on the front of the car that you saw. Otherwise, I don't even fucking know how to end that. Kill me. For this video, we're gonna assume that you're taking the shocks out as well. If you aren't, zip tie the caliper up to the spring here or wherever you see fit. You can zip tie it up to the shock. If you are taking the shock off, do not zip tie it to the shock. I did mine on a bar on the front of the car. There'll be a little bushing that the brake line mounts to here. You will have to take that off of the shock and then your caliper will be free to move around and zip tie up. This is an educational. I'm gonna get terrible comments about how I just explained this like shit.
I don't think we're getting any comments.
Okay, we're getting no comments.
We literally both started on the same fucking thing. We both had comments. Fucking A.
Following removing the caliper, you can do this a lot of different ways. The way I did it was I then moved to the tie rod on each side. I could not for the life of me hit the tie rods out after loosening the nut. This is the passenger side shock. I ended up having to cut it because I couldn't pry it out, but it's very easy to see if you're under the car. It'll be located, this is the passenger side, so it'll be located towards the rear of the car, this bracket here.
It's just, if you don't know, just follow your steering rack.
Genius.
Yep.
There'll be a cotter pin. Take the cotter pin out, loosen the nut. If you can hit it out, I hope you can, because grinding it sucks. But if you can't, I had to grind mine off, and then I'll be dealing with this later. You can then twist the tie rod off. There'll be a lock nut on the end. Hopefully you don't have poor tie rods, but there's actual tabs here to hold it with a wrench while you undo the lock nut, and then with a wrench you can twist it off. Right after the tie rod, you will have the tension arms you have to remove. They mount to the lower control arm with 2 nuts at the bottom of the lower control arm. This thing's just angled terribly. But what you'll do is take the 2 nuts off of the tension arm, then there will be a nut at the front. Just follow the tension arm up from the lower control arm and take this nut off, and then you should be able to hit the tension arm out and pry it down and take it out completely. After the tension arm, you'll want to take your front sway bar off. The sway bar end links, the sway bar is right here. The end links mount to the control arm right next to where the tension rod mounts. Very easy to see, you cannot miss it. Undo that, and then after undoing the sway bar end link from the lower control arm, follow it up and take off where the sway bar mounts to there'll be brackets where your tension rod mounted, the sway bar also mounts to. After undoing this, your sway bar can come off. Assuming you're moving your front shocks, you can then move to the lower control arm here. All you have to do, it's 1 bolt, but it's tricky to take off. Why it's tricky to take off is there's not a lot of room to have access to where it mounts. It's easy to follow, easy to visualize, but it's hard to get a wrench in. Normally on the front of the car, you'll have easy access, but the rear, the steering rack, will get in the way of getting access to the nut on this side. You'll need a long wrench to get access to that nut. After sinking a wrench in and loosening that lower control arm bolt and taking it out, all that's holding your front shocks in would be the top nuts. On a turbo, you'll have...
This is in your engine bay.
Yes.
So you're gonna pop your hood.
On a turbo, you'll have your adjustable shocks in the front. So you'll have to support the shock while you loosen it and take all the nuts off to get access to this wiring. If you don't have a turbo car, you can remove the 3 nuts, and I would still support it with a jack and then wiggle it out as a full assembly like I did. It's going to be tricky with the turbo with the wiring because you do have to pop that wire off, otherwise you're going to damage it. So keep it supported, take the nuts off, pop the wire. It's identical to the rear shocks if you did that first. Otherwise, to recap, it's just a tab you push in and pull out. Easier said than done. Then you can lower the jack, pull it out. From that point, you'll want to take precautionary measures, and a lot of people do it with wood, I've seen, and ratchet straps. I did not do it that way. I bought an engine bar. There is a great spot when mounting the engine bar to hook a chain to and support the engine, because obviously if you're removing your front subframe, that's what holds your engine in place. Your engine's just gonna drop and you're gonna fucking die under there. Jesus Christ. Don't put that in. Obviously you want to support your engine. There are videos out there of people doing it with wood and ratchet straps. Do it the right way, or at least try to. Buy an engine bar. I also supported it here. This isn't the best location, but I wanted reassurance. Not only that one mount, I wrapped it through here. It's kind of tricky to avoid this AC belt, but I made it work. After supporting the engine, you can start taking the main stuff off, I'd say. Once you remove the sway bar, you can remove these brackets located in front of the subframe where your tension rod and your sway bar mounted to. There will be 3 bolts, 1, 2, 3 on each side of the car. Take those off, this bracket will come off. Following removing these brackets on each side of the car, you will want to do the steering rack next. When you are removing the front subframe, the steering rack is just gonna hang there, so you're gonna wanna support it, whether it be zip ties. I did a jack that's still under there holding it. That block of wood is doing absolutely nothing. But yeah, you're gonna wanna support it. It can be tricky to get access to where the steering rack mounts. These brackets are tight to the engine, and it can be hard to get these top ones, especially for the bolt and nuts that hold the steering rack in place. There's also, on top of that, a small heat shield, or fucking, I don't even know, this ain't a heat. Why did I say heat shield? I don't know. There's also a small bracket that is located, I believe it mounts like this. You can't miss it when you're undoing this. Also take this bracket off. When undoing the steering rack, there will also be mounted to some of these holes. I don't believe all are used, but there will be additional clamps attached to the front of the subframe you're gonna wanna undo while undoing the main part of the steering rack. It was a job to do these. It was hard to access. I got in there with a 3/8 ratchet, a swivel, and a wrench. It is possible, it's tedious. You'll have to figure out what works best for you. It's very difficult to get at these bolts and nuts because of how tight the rack is to the engine. The approach is different for each one. It's not gonna be the same. You're gonna have to work it out yourself. I used wrenches, I used a swivel, I stuck with a 3/8 ratchet for everything. Jesus Christ. I stuck with a 3/8 ratchet. I stuck with a 3/8 ratchet for everything. It's a job, but once they're free, the rack is free. You'll probably have to pop it up a little bit. It might be kind of stuck in there, but keep it supported. From there, your subframe will only be held in by the motor mounts, which I decided to take my motor mounts off. I was replacing them, They're a nut on each side. If you want to leave them in, all you have to do is undo the bottom nut and leave it. This is a turbo, so the subframe is angled each way. On NA cars, these brackets right here will be angled the same way. Isn't a huge difference, but if you're concerned that why isn't my subframe looking like this, you have an NA, buddy. These nuts for the engine mount are easy to get to on a turbo. These are angled opposite of each other. On an NA, they're angled the same way. Undo the bottom nuts unless you're replacing your engine mounts. The top nut is tricky to get to. It's kind of like the steering rack. There's multiple approaches to it, but regardless, it's tight to get a wrench into. After you've taken off the bottom bolts for the engine mounts, all that's left, the main points that hold the subframe, the front subframe in.
On 2 sides.
On both sides, they're symmetrical. When you undo those, your subframe is free. It really isn't that hard to wiggle out. It's a lot easier than the rear subframe. The rear subframe took me half an hour to wiggle free. This will probably take you 5 minutes, maximum 10 minutes. Like a fucking piece of cake. Woo! That concludes both subframes, the disassembly of both. After they're out, you can obviously disassemble them further. I am not going to do that since you're replacing. If you're doing the Apex install, you don't need to disassemble these further unless you want to. But since we're covering the Apex install, it's unnecessary. Following this video, it's going to take a while because I still have some parts to get sorted, like buying the new engine mounts, and I'm going with coilovers on this, so I got to get those too. But it'll be a little bit, but we'll move on to the install since everything's out. Doing the removal like this, where everything's out already, and explaining it might be difficult to process. I did it this way because if you just take the shots of everything out of the car, it may be easier to understand. There's already people out there that are taking videos of them removing it underneath the car that people can reference. I wanted to change it up and do it a little different, where we can just say, oh, you need to remove this bolt, and you can see the whole assembly as it is and reference it without the end of the car. It's just a different perspective to understand. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this perspective, give us a like, leave a comment on what you think. If there's anything I missed, go ahead and comment that as well. We'll be on to doing the install hopefully soon. Obviously the disassembly can go a lot faster than the install. I still have parts to buy. So once we're ready for that, we'll continue the series and make the install video. And we'll be up to something. We'll see you in the next video.